Please be seated, won't you? Good morning. So we're getting ready for the season of Lent. And so for a lot of us, that might mean that we're preparing for taking on certain spiritual disciplines, or maybe giving something up, or taking something on. And in our scriptures for today, we have a couple of different images about mountains. We have this beautiful image of Moses going to the mountaintop for 40 days to pray and to receive the thing that God is going to offer as the Ten Commandments. We also have a little bit of a mountaintop experience with what Jesus is talking about a little bit. We have the Transfiguration, and in a few weeks we'll read the scripture about Jesus's 40 days in the desert. And so there's other 40 days, of course, you know, the story of Noah, and there's other periods of that 40 days. And in each of them, there's this time, and it's a journey, right? And it's a time of sort of figuring things out, and something happens. So I want you to kind of think about journeys that you've been on in your life. How many of you have ever done a mountaintop experience, right? Or walked up or hiked up a mountain, right? So usually that means, you know, you're in Colorado and you go to a place where the path is already set out for you and you know exactly how long it is, but you've got to get ready, right? So you got to make sure you have enough to drink. You've got to make sure you have maybe the right shoes, and you kind of head up. And the funny thing is about our culture is, you know, most of us, when we go on a trip, don't have to plan too much, because if you have a little bit of money, you can go almost anywhere, and everything that you need is somewhere in flatland, right? You can go to a store, you can go to Quick Trip, you can go somewhere and get sort of what you need. We don't have ways of going to trips for provisions. But to think about a spiritual journey or any kind of journey, there is often, you know, the unexpected that happens. A number of years ago, when I was serving at St. Peter's in Conway, Arkansas, our youth group really wanted to do a mission trip. And I had led, before that, a number of mission trips to Juarez, Mexico. And they really wanted to do that. They'd heard me talk about it, and they thought this would be awesome. And so the relationship that I had with a particular priest, they were not able to take us at the time we wanted to go. And so we signed up for a youth mission experience. And it sounded really neat on paper 6 months before. We were going to go and live in a community, meet the people that live there, live alongside them, and then work with the family. And we would build, in the week that we were there, we would build a small home to kind of help them. This is in Anapra, which is right next to Juarez, which is right across the border from El Paso. And you also have a chance to experience the border culture and all the beauty of that. And so part of it was we would be literally living in the neighborhood, and we would live next to where the family is. And so that meant we were going to be camping. And most of these kids had not really camped. We were smart, and we took a couple of adults along that knew about camping, and we were sort of prepared. And there was things that we were sort of set up to understand, right? One of them was we were given a limited amount of water a day. So we were each given about a half a gallon of water. And that was what we were supposed to use for brushing our teeth, for washing, and things like that. You think, oh, that's lots. It's really not. And so that was the water that we were given. And we had other water for drinking. And then we had to take provision for our food. We weren't, going to go out to eat or these different things. And the point of the mission was to take people that were living in suburbia, and get them out into the rest of the world. The other part was to experience real people in a culture and to learn and to be exposed. There's all kinds of different things that was supposed to happen. And so we were really ill prepared and weren't going to do very well. And we didn't know that. And one of the days, we had worked really hard, and we'd met our family, and they were amazing people and resilient, and they worked harder than any of us could work. And so we were learning about that. And then we came back, and it was time to kind of make our dinner, and the kids were in charge, and so they were making the dinner. And one of the kids had brought a recipe for They called it spaghetti nachos. You ever had that? So basically, it's a camping thing. It's pretty simple. It's like a ragu spaghetti sauce and some chips and a little bit of like mozzarella cheese. So not particularly nutritious, but when you're camping, it was perfect. And so we're all sitting around, and I was eating last, and we're all getting ready to kind of sit down. I finally, I'm exhausted. I've been doing hard work, and we sit down, and a gust of wind comes up. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen when you're camping, but my nachos went with the wind. And that was it for us for the food that day. It was a little dejecting, shall I say. What we didn't know is it was a foreshadowing of what was coming. Okay? So remember, we're all in tents. We're living out in the desert. We're experiencing, the other side of the reality of the world and learning. And so we go and we have another hard day's work. That day we were doing the foundation. We mixed the cement by hand. We were guided by our family and other people in how to do the work. None of us had really done that kind of work before. And so we're having this, incredible work experience. We had a good meal when we got back. No, actually, that's not what happened that day. But when we were coming back, there's a windstorm. That's what it was. And there's a huge windstorm. And we're like, oh, thank God we're not eating. That's what I remember we were talking about. So we get back to the campsite, and guess what we discover? The wind had also decided that it needed our tents. And about 2/3 of the tents that we had brought had gone to another part of the world with our stuff. And so there we were, and of course my tent was one of the ones that completely went away. And we're sort of dejected, and we're trying to figure it out. And of course, other people who were there, this was not an uncommon experience for people who went on this trip. The family and others came and helped us, and we figured it out, and a few of us slept outside, and we doubled up in our tents, and we figured out sharing of the clothes that we had, and we kind of got it figured out, and we were able to reprovision, and life went on, and we succeeded over that 8-day period. We got the house completed. We had this amazing time. We had all kinds of other things happen, and part of it was the sort of journey that we went on, right? And part of the funny thing is, what stayed with me through my life is every once in a while, when things are kind of really rough, I'll just say, well, in my mind, I'll say, it's not as bad as the spaghetti nachos. It's just one of those sort of moments where, you sort of got that reality, but of course it was passing and we went on. I think about that experience, and I think about sort of a Lenten journey, and I think about our life, and I think about the things that come up, and how many of us have these twists and turns in our life, and how many things happen, right? Where things didn't work out quite like they would. And sometimes they're inspiring and beautiful, and then sometimes they're dejecting and difficult, and we're defeated. And there's other realities that can go on. So we live in a liturgical church, so we've all attached ourselves to a church that has a liturgical pattern here. And part of that liturgical pattern is Lent. And Lent is a season of 40 days in which we can embark on a kind of journey. And so part of that is to think about, what are our provisions for the journey of Lent that we've set out? What is it that we want to kind of get out of the journey? What are things that we can sort of bring into our spiritual life? The beauty of this is it's meant to give us a focus. So in the early church, this was the season when people were prepared for baptism. So if you think back that in the first few generations, there's lots of baptisms because nobody's really baptized. And so every time you're coming in, and so this season got set aside as a time when people new to the faith community would be separated from the rest of it, and they're trained and they're taught the ways, and then they would be baptized on Easter. And so it was a time of setting apart, of teaching, of something called the catechism, which was learning about the faith. And then a few generations down the road, more and more people are baptized, and then Lent becomes also a season of spiritual discipline, and it develops over centuries. So this isn't like a committee sat down and said this. It was just sort of over time. new traditions came up. And so Lent becomes a particular season of spiritual journey in which we think about our sinfulness, we think about reconciliation, we think about deepening our faith walk. We liturgically, we'll change the liturgy. We'll begin with confession next week. We'll simplify the decorations of the church, the liturgical items. The music will shift a little bit, and it's seen as a time of less to sort of bring our focus, right, on the spiritual practices. Now, a lot of us probably give something up. We're taught, maybe you were taught as a child, or maybe you first start with, what are you going to give up for Lent? How many of you give something up for Lent, right? Or how many of you take something on for Lent? That's kind of been a new thing. Or how many of you maybe start a prayer practice or focus on, and how many of you don't do anything? It's okay. Let's be honest. So sometimes we're like, we intend to, but Lent can be a time when we kind of do that. So Lent is 40 days. Now, the people who can count are going to get a calendar out and they're going to look at it and say, now, wait a minute, Father Gar, there are 46 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter. And you are correct. And then the lawyers in the room are going to look at the fine print and they're going to say, now, wait a second. Some of those days are Sundays. And I think if I read it right, those are days of resurrection and still feast days. And then when I say you're supposed to fast for 40 days, you're going to say, oh, so those 6 days, maybe I don't have to fast, right? Have you ever heard this? Yeah. So if you want to fast for 46 days or 40 and take Sundays off, that's between you and God. So not going to solve it for you. Both traditions have legitimate understandings, and I really don't want to cause a fight, in the church right now. So, but those are all different parts of the tradition. But you can kind of find different things that you can do. So I just came up with a list of some things that people have talked about trying or thought about. One of them is committing to a morning quiet time or an evening quiet time or devotional time. So that can mean you're going to do it for 40 days or 46 days. You're going to take it and you're just going to say, I'm going to do it for this period of time. So you're not committing for 365 or 10 years. You're just going to do a little bit. So that might mean grabbing a day by day that's on the rack out there, or it might mean there's great apps that you can get that will give you a daily devotional. There's websites. You might even want to pick a book up. Those are things that you can do. We have these amazing devices. We call them phones. We don't actually use them for that much. But you can set a reminder a couple of times a day, 3 times a day, to stop and pray. So you can have something that will pop up and sort of say, pray. And maybe commit to taking a few minutes during that time to pray. If you have a smartwatch, there are apps you can add that will do that for you. You can even suggest a prayer. You can even just commit to stopping 3 times a day and saying the Lord's Prayer to yourself or something like that. Those are some things you can think about. Some of you I know are doing the Bible in a year. You can also decide if you're not doing that or want to do something else. You can decide to take a part of the Bible and read it during this time. So maybe take one of the Gospels or to take some of Paul's letters or something from the Old Testament to do. Some people have talked about studying Jesus. So that might seem kind of interesting, but there's great books that you can go and look at the more of the life, not just reading the Gospels, but studying books that talk a little bit about who Jesus was and what he did, and maybe understanding that differently. Some people limit or completely abstain from social media or other media. So they might decide they're not going to watch television or get on Facebook or Instagram or woo-woo or whatever it is that's the thing. If you go look up woo-woo, it doesn't exist. I'm just being funny. But there's all kinds of things you can do. But sometimes taking a break from those things, or maybe deciding that you're going to limit your time on your devices. You're going to put your phone down at 3 o'clock and not pick it up the rest of the evening, or whatever you're able to do. Some people abstain from a specific food during Lent. Maybe you give up chocolate, or maybe you give up alcohol, or some other thing that you decide that you want to do for that time. There is fasting, and so one of these things is if it's medically safe for you to fast. Fasting can be a 24-hour period, can be 12 hours. One of the things I like to do during Lent is I will often take a day fast from sunup until sundown on Fridays. There's lots of different traditions that you can look at. You just got to make sure it's medically safe for you to do that. There is something called the 40-day Daniel fast. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but this is a fast which you abstain from all meat, animal byproducts, sweets, and alcohol. And so then basically you're eating fruits and vegetables and nuts during the season of Lent. Maybe that's too much for you, but that's something that's out there to kind of think about. There are finding ways to serve. So maybe you're going to commit and go down and work at the community kitchen one day a week throughout the season of Lent, or I'm going to help at IHN, or whatever opportunities you can find to serve. Another is to maybe renew your commitment to community. So that might mean making a commitment to come and be part of church, go to Sunday school, participate in your neighborhood group, whatever that might be. It could also be, one thing that I did one year is I decided I was going to reconnect with friends. So I decided that each week I would have a breakfast or lunch with two of my friends for the 6 weeks of Lent. And so I went and found people that I had sort of lost touch with, or I had felt close to at one point, but just sort of neglected the friendship, and tried to re-spark the friendship up and living into community. Part of that also is we can maybe do some work on our relationships. Maybe you have a relationship in your family or in your life that you just feel like you need to work on, and actually being intentional about reaching out to the person. There's also things like reconciliation and other things that you can do. So those are all things you can choose from. So here's the trick. How many of you have ever signed up for a gym membership and met with the physical trainer in the first week and they took you to the limit of your body? And then you were so sore you couldn't move for 6 months. Yeah, that's a marketing trick to get you to pay for a gym membership you're not going to use. And it's dangerous because that's so often we do that. We're like, I'm going to do this. And so you do everything you can, and then by the third day, you're like, moving on. That's not what we want to do. What you want to do is find something you can do, and don't make the commitment. So don't say, I'm going to pray every day, I'm going to fast, I'm going to, and then suddenly you set yourself up to not do it, and then you feel guilty, you've let God down, you've let yourself down. That's not the point. The point is to try something for this time. And Lent isn't, this is a good practice. If it works for you for now, you can then say, well, I'm going to try that again. You don't have to wait for the church to call it Lent. You can take another season and try something if you want to. And that's a good way to kind of create new habits and new spiritual practices. So I say this because then I think what it kind of does is it prepares us for when we face, those challenging times in life. It helps us to grow closer to God. It helps us in our faith work, or sometimes we have to be intentional about doing that. Sometimes we go through periods of our life when we feel God's absence, or maybe we just can't come to pray. And so one of the beauties of a liturgical tradition is you're given prayers that you can say week after week. You don't have to write them. You don't have to come up with them. They're just there. It's kind of rote prayer. My liturgical professor called it being marinated in God. You come every week, you are marinated in the prayers, in the Book of Common Prayer, in the readings, in the hymns. And if that's all you can muster, it is impacting you, even if you're not able to be open to it. There are those moments in life like what I had where, it all seems like, that meal's going to be so good, and then it just sort of, life turns and it just goes away. And those are fleeting moments often that aren't permanent, and they don't stay. And I think these practices and going on these Lenten journeys and doing the hard work can prepare us for the other times, and they set seeds. So we'll begin our Lenten journey this week, and so maybe think about it over the next 3 or so days about how you're going to provision for that time. What practice might you take on? What might you focus on this season? And how might you seek to grow your relationship with God, or in community, or with each other? But also, how do you continue to deepen your faith? Amen.